Hey y'all, I'm Reese, and welcome to Making Meaning. Making Meaning is a podcast by the Cohere Collective here to help guide you along your path to make meaning in a way that makes sense for you. This week, I am joined by author and life coach Shannon Talbot. Shannon is the author of the wonderful book Breaking Free that discusses a lot about her own personal journey to finding her own happiness and what makes her life a joyful one and how she helps others do the same. So I'm sure you can tell how aligned Shannon and I are in our personal journeys and life purposes. In this episode, we chat a lot about the book, but also what it means to be a mom on this journey, because Shannon is a mother to two boys, and what it means to be a partner, and what it means as, we make these decisions as adults that feel like really radical paradigm shifts, but also really important to our own personal journeys. How does that impact the people around us? Today also marks the first episode that Making Meaning is going to try something new. Every time we receive a review or comment on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, we're going to give that listener a shout out. And so today we're going to start with the very first review that was ever left for me on Apple Podcasts from user Milo Says No Nickname. So thank you so much, Milo Says No Nickname, for this beautiful and lovely comment. He talks a little bit about Lauren's episode from season 1, Warren's episode in season 1, and encourages to keep up the amazing work. So thank you so much, Milo Says No Nickname. I remember the first time I read this comment and how much it meant to me, so I really appreciate you, and I hope you're still listening. If anyone else would like to leave a comment or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube, you will be getting a shout out in the next episode, so get those comments in. In addition to ratings and reviews and comments, you can also subscribe to Making Meaning on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and you can follow the Cohere Collective on all social media platforms at the Cohere Collective. If you want even more about the Cohere Collective, you can head to www.thecoherecollective.com to learn about the collective and what we do and how you can be a part. I believe that is all I have, so as always, let's take a deep breath. And get started. Shannon, thank you so much for being here with me today and taking the time and energy to have a conversation about your story, but also this beautiful story, Breaking Free. One, I just love all the colors on it. I think it's just beautiful and is a perfect visual representation of what the book communicates to, which is just so lovely. The first question that I always like to start with, just to really kick things off on a good foot, is what is one thing you're grateful for right now?
Great question. So Reese, and thanks for having me here too. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh, of course.
You know what? I had a really, really great evening last night with my husband and my two sons. And sometimes I feel like we're all passing ships in the night because we're all so busy. And we had this just impromptu, really nice evening together. And I'm just really grateful that we had quality time that wasn't in front of the TV together.
Yes. Right. You're actually face to face and talking, which is nice.
Yes.
I love that. Okay. Well, second question that I always ask that will really kickstart our conversation is, what is your story? For the listeners, a lot of Shannon's story is also discussed in the book Breaking Free, but whatever you're called to share right now is perfect.
Sure. So I think the story I like to share most with people, and I'm sure the listeners are all at different stages and things like that. So take what you may from my story, but in 2008, that was kind of when things started to really change for me. That was the year I got married. And it was also the year I took a leave of absence from work to go and do my MBA. And I was working at a bank in the time I worked in corporate for 17 years before starting my own business. And that was my first real title, right? Like until then, we don't have titles. And I became a Mrs. And it's funny because it's just a title, right? But with that title, I put expectations on myself. And I told myself, oh, Shannon, like, you don't like cooking? Well, no, too bad. Now's the time you really have to step it up. You need to cook. You're a wife now. Or you need to learn to garden and sew and all these things. And my husband wasn't asking for any of that. Like, he's an incredible person. He's super supportive. He loves doing that stuff. But I told myself I had to. And also I was reliant on his income for the first time ever. Like, I'd been making money since I was 12. And so I was relying on him, and I thought, oh no, this is, I reverted back to being a 1950s housewife, which was just a bit silly. And, I have friends who are stay-at-home moms, and I admire that. And it's really hard work. But for some reason I put this pressure on myself. That was like, oh, Shannon, like, no, you have to be a different person. And I started losing a bit of myself. I started acting how I thought I should in these situations. Meanwhile, I went back to work. I ended up, moving up the corporate ladder at work, and with each, new title. And then I started managing people, and I started getting more and more responsibility. And then I started telling myself again, oh, now you have to act this way, or now you have to be this way. And it just kept building. And I would, it came to be too much. I wasn't good at prioritizing my well-being. I wasn't good at looking after stress or anxiety. And I did what I call press the easy button. And I would switch jobs. I'd switch companies. And I hid things. Like I hid, struggling with infertility at work. We moved on. We couldn't get pregnant. We adopted our kids. I hid that at work because, again, I was so afraid of what people would think and how I would be treated, and would it impact my career negatively.
Right.
So, but I still had a really great career. I still did really well. I had the husband. We later had the 2 kids, and on paper, everything looks fantastic. And actually, it was ticking the boxes of how I would have defined success. Like all of the boxes were being checked, but there was still something missing. So the first part of my journey, so my journey has 2 parts. The first part of my journey was when my then 5-year-old, he's 10 now, was admitted to hospital for 31 days. I'd like to say it's his appendix gone rogue, something simple that turned into a nightmare.
Right.
And it was the first time my career really took a back seat. And I sat and I asked myself 3 questions. And I said, am I happy? Am I healthy? Do I feel fulfilled? And my answers were like, not really. But then the next feeling was guilt, because I was like, oh, Shannon, on paper, you're incredible. How can you feel that something's missing? But this time I said, I'm not going to listen to the guilt, and I am going to chase my happy, as I like to call it, and look at, find those things. So I started out, I moved from banking into advertising into a more creative space. I set a 10-year goal for myself to start a business, all these things. But I still was holding myself back a bit. I was still letting the fears and the silly stories we tell ourselves, holding ourselves back. So then the next big pivotal moment for me was January 2021. I was pushing my then 5-year-old. There's something that happens when my kids are 5. They're like wise beyond their years. And I was pushing my then 5-year-old, who's now 8, almost 9, on the swing. And he said, Mommy, can I give you a goal this year? And I was really excited. I was like, yes. I was doing my coaching certifications at the time on the side. And it's like, yeah, bud, what's your goal for me? And he said, can you be less angry this year? You're angry all the time. And that was not the goal I was expecting, but it was the goal I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And that was the goal that finally was my wake-up call to say, okay, Shannon, yes, you've made some progress, but you're still playing it safe in a way. And it is time to live a more meaningful life. It's time to do what's right for you and not chase what I traditionally chased as success.
Right.
And so a few months later, I quit my corporate job. I started my coaching and speaking business, and then later fulfilled my dream of writing this book, Breaking Free, as well.
I love that. Wow. Isn't it crazy how life always gives us those goals that we need to hear, right? Not
Yes.
always the ones that we want, but the universe brings us exactly what we need.
Yes.
Um, I want to revisit. There's several points in your story where you talk about the things that we think we should do, or the things that, um, are the boxes that we're checking. Where do you think those shoulds come from? Where do those boxes come from? Because I totally agree. It feels like there's almost this list that exists inside of our heads of, this is how I will be happy, healthy, successful, good, worthy. Where do you think that messaging begins?
So mine is and it's funny, I don't think I connected the dots until I started writing my book. And I don't know if you've ever played the game of life.
Mm-hmm.
Mine literally came from playing the game of life as a child. And I'm an 80s child, in case anyone's wondering how old I am. And I played the game of life. And it was driven by, okay, I'm going to go to school after high school. I'm going to, and in that case, like for me, it was the money, right? And if you got the lawyer card, you made the most money. So back then the game was, if you became a lawyer, you made 50,000 a year. So, and then you get married, then you have the kids and you have enough kids to fit in the car. So I was like, even in my mind, I'm like, you have to have 4 kids. 4 kids is the number of kids to have. And you
Right.
buy the house and you get the insurances. And on one hand, it's good to teach you some of those things, but it's hilarious. I brought up the game recently and I played it with my kids who are almost 9 and 11 now. And right away, they were like, what if I don't want to get married? I don't want to get married. And especially my 9-year-old who really claims right now he's never getting married or anything.
Right.
And maybe he won't. It's up to him. But it was this whole thing. Like, what if I don't want kids? And it was them questioning, and I loved it because I was like, yes, we should be questioning. But I think
Yeah.
depending on how you were raised and your family values and society and all of this stuff, right? We were raised with a certain, expectation to, make at least make a stable income, right? Maybe it wasn't always about
Yeah.
the money and title and things like that. But yeah, you need to, make a stable income. You need to have a stable job. You need to, have a life partner, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Have kids so when you're older, someone can look after you, right? It was all of these things that we were told would lead to success. But it's not always true. and
Yeah.
and really, it wasn't until probably just a couple years ago when I started to finally redefine what success was for me.
How do you define it now?
Well, I'll share that. I made a mistake even still. When I left corporate, I defined success and I still messed up. I still defined it as money. And actually that was the main driver, was money. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with my cousin's wife, who's also an entrepreneur. And I was like, oh, I'm not even going to come close to making my definite this goal my first year. And she's like, what's your goal? And I shared it with her and she goes, that's absurd. Like, it's your first year of business. What were you thinking? I'm like, I don't know. But then I realized I didn't leave the corporate world to make the money. I could have stayed there if it was just about the money. I was making really good money when I left. I was at the peak of my career. If it was just about the money, I would have stayed.
Right.
I left because I wanted better balance, because I wanted the freedom, and I really wanted to help make a difference in people's lives. I want to help people live happier and healthier and more fulfilling lives. And that is the whole reason why I started my company. And so I had to redefine success, and I had to, make it more about the meaning of what the work I'm doing, and then also include my family in there too. And it's, one of my dreams, and it's so simple, but it's something I could never do before, was I just wanted to walk my kids to and from school. Because I couldn't do that before. Like, I was always at work before they'd even leave, kind of thing. And that was one simple thing. Success to me was doing that. Right. And I think that's the other thing. It's also looking at what are those small moments in your everyday that are going to bring you joy versus getting so fixated on the big milestones that, yes, bring us joy, but it's usually fleeting right after.
Mm, absolutely. I really do think that goes back to like this concept of the difference between happiness and joy, right? That joy is tinged with so many different complex feelings and emotions and the impermanence of life and, you know, through the face of hardship, still cultivating joy, whereas happiness is this kind of fleeting feeling, right? Depending on how you define these two different things.
Mhm.
Um, and I absolutely agree. Where do you think that that message gets either stuck in our brains as young kids? Because I think so many of us have this kind of conveyor belt that we're plopped on that says high school, get good grades so you can go to college to get good grades so you can get a good job to make good money and work your way up the ladder so you can get a good partner so you can have the good kids, the good family, the good retirement, and you're happy. It's been joyful, maybe along the way. Where do you think that messaging originates? Why are we socialized in this way?
I think it's just typically how we've rewarded people. And
Mm,
it's so funny too because I'm now on this next path and writing my next book, and it is more about the happiness and the joy and the small moments and things like that. And it's interesting because 2 years ago I was going to start down this path, and I started sharing with some people. You know what, I love studying happiness, and I'm gonna start studying happiness and work, do that for my work. And I would get told, that's fluffy. Happiness is fluffy. And it's funny, at the time, it deterred me enough to not do it. And
yeah,
now I'm like, what? Since when is happiness fluffy? Since when is joy not like, shouldn't be one of our top priorities,
right.
right? If we are, and it's interesting too, because, and the unfortunate part is I'll ask my kids, I'll say, what do you think is the number one driver? Probably use a different word because I might not know what that means, but can't
Right.
think of another one. But what's the number one driver in happiness? And it's fine. One of my sons first was like, to get rich, like to have lots of money. And I'm like, no. And then my other kids, like, to be a famous YouTuber. And I'm like, no. And so even now,
Yeah.
like, what worries me is their definition to be famous, right? Like with all these
Yeah.
YouTubers, and I know like podcasts like yours and your YouTube, it's super helpful, but there's a lot of stuff out there where people are making millions
Yeah.
of dollars for playing video games online, right? So now it worries me that their definition may not necessarily be money, but it's about the celebrity factor.
Mm.
And that's being influenced by social media.
Yeah.
So for me, like I'm on this mission now, and I'm trying to do it with my kids too. And it's like, no, it's about, and Harvard did the longest running study on happiness. And the number one factor is relationships, and
Yeah.
not even just romantic, like just strong, positive relationships in your lives are the number one factor to happiness. And that's what I really want to hone in on and want my kids to realize and recognize and work on in this, developing connection. But also the number one stressor right now is
Yeah.
money. So I do feel like relationships are really important, but then also financial stability enough to, not be stressed about paying your bills and
Right.
the cost of groceries and everything right now. I think financial stability is also really important. And I think that's somewhere too that I think, these are things not necessarily taught in schools,
Yeah.
right? Like the two of the most important factors of our lives are not taught in schools. And
Yeah.
that's what I would love to see change.
Absolutely. Well, and it really is like bridging this gap between what we need to do to survive, right? And what we really need to do to thrive.
Yes.
And finding a way to make those things live happily next to each other and hold both is really difficult, especially with this messaging. And I relate to your two boys a little bit in the sense of being raised in the age of social media, and celebrity is the biggest currency that follower count is a huge currency. And even being a young entrepreneur wanting to, survive and thrive, a lot of the time the question is, well, what's your follower count? That will determine
Mhm.
the amount of money we will give you. Like it has a direct one-to-one translation correlation. And I think what you said about it being this reward system is really enlightening to me, because money has always been how we reward people. And of course, what you reward people with is what is valued. If that is the thing that, you do a good job, so you get $100 bill, it's like, well, of course, that's value being placed on that money that you're getting. And where are we as a society placing our value? On that
Yeah.
follower count, on that money, or on our interpersonal relationships, on our personal growth, on all of
Mhm.
these other things?
Yeah. And I was even talking, my husband and I have had some pretty awesome and deep conversations lately. Just on, he's not as into personal growth as I am. So he's like, oh no, here we go again. But he's been really great. And it was even, it's funny because we look back and some of our favorite times are when we didn't have money. When we
Yeah,
did Europe on the cheap, and we, like, one place we stayed in was horrible. But it's like, I remember that over the nicer
yeah,
hotel, right? And I said to him, I'm like, we need to get back to this good, nice balance of, yes, still we love to travel. We want to afford to travel and do things like that, but also not I always mix up the saying, but we don't want to work to live, right?
yeah,
We want to live
yes,
to work, or
to
whichever the
work.
right one
Yes,
is. Like in Europe, they
right.
do it right, right? And in
Yeah,
North America, like, we're so busy working that
yeah.
then we don't always have the time to even enjoy the financial benefits of our work, or we're too tired at the end of the day to even hang out with the people we love.
Absolutely. Well, and I was reading something the other day that was talking about how our bodies are not meant for hard, strenuous work for 8 to 9 hours a day. Like our brain physically can't be focused for
Mm.
that long. Um, and this study was talking about like students that had like really condensed like 3 hours of good, hard focus. And then the rest of the time was play, creativity, expansive kind of thinking, and they're energized after that. They're
Mhm.
actually more productive. Things are getting done more because that's the capacity that our brain actually has. And I think the more and more that we learn about the self, the more and more I think you're also spot on. The things that we teach in school, like this needs to be incorporated into policy and actionable changes that will help people like your kiddos and
Mhm.
the future generation hopefully have a different outlook on what the real reward is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
I want to dive into this bad boy, your book. And I actually just want to start with the title. I
Mm.
think so often my master's is in English, so of course I'm like the textual stuff is all I read into things sometimes, but I also think it's deeply interesting because we tend to brush by titles so often, um, of books. And I really want to talk about what the words you've chosen
Mm.
here mean.
Mhm.
Breaking free. First question that comes to mind for me is, what are we breaking free from?
Hmm. So it can be different things. The overall concept behind breaking free was, break it down really simple, was get out of your own way. Like,
Hmm.
break free from the chains. Like, and I almost went with, I chose birds, but because it's more beautiful, and I really love birds. And there's been times in my life where I've been struggling, having a rough day, and I live in downtown Toronto, and there'll be like a hawk on the tree outside my window, which is not normal. And I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. Or I'll go to my parents and there'll be an owl there, which is also a bit rare to see. So I have this thing with birds. So, but really, to picture it, like, I picture we're handcuffed in a way, and we're handcuffed to how we think we should be or think we should act or what society tells us to do. And so we hold ourselves back, right? Whether even just a little bit sometimes, or we let our fears stop us from going after what we really want.
Yeah.
And so breaking free to me means to stop holding yourself back, to chase your dreams, chase your goals, go after whatever like a meaningful life means to you. And it can mean whatever you want. There's no judgment here, right? Everyone is entitled to their own dreams and goals and whatever lights them up. But it's really about setting yourself free to bring more of what you want into your life.
Yeah. I love that we are both, forgive this language, but our captors and our rescuers. Like we play both of those roles, which that's actually a great segue into a section in your book that talks about roles and titles. And, I'll throw it back to what you mentioned at the beginning of your story, that you felt the need to take on this 50s housewife kind of role, because that is the way. So I'm in Texas,
Yep.
deep South, well, Southwest. Texas is its own thing, but there's certainly a lot of expectations around what marriage is supposed to look like, what a good wife looks like, what a good woman looks like. And I was lucky enough to be raised in a home that broke free of a lot of those messages. But, we're still socialized around us, even if our family of origin is not communicating those messages, the world around us still does. What do you think that piece about roles and titles does to our brain in terms of those like expectations that both are put on us externally, but like you mentioned, also internally? Like your husband wasn't asking for, stay in the kitchen, clean the house, but still we have this like internalized piece.
Mm-hmm.
I would just talk to me about that more.
Yeah. And I have to say, and of course I'm a coach, so I'm going to, I'm biased, but I think there is a really big reason why coaches and therapists and counselors and mentors and all these people exist as professions, and they're growing. The numbers in those fields are growing because all of us, every single one of us, forms beliefs and stories about ourselves from the time we were born. And as we grow, right? Our parents, our teachers, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings, friends, society, social media, right? Each layer or each person will have an impact on us for good or for bad, right? Sometimes it's for good, which is lovely, but also sometimes it's for bad. And we develop these beliefs about ourselves that we may not even know are there. And I call them our blind spots. So if I have two examples. So one example, one of my clients that I worked with, she was really at this point in her career where she wasn't happy. And so we started chatting and she's like, ugh, everyone around me is getting promoted. Everyone's making more money than me. Everyone's getting better projects than me. And it was this whole thing of like everyone else. And it was true. Like there were facts to back it up. But also at the same time, it's like, okay, well, what's your role in this? Or like, what are you doing about it? Because at the end of the day, we're responsible for our lives and our careers. And I was getting a lot of pushback. And so I did an exercise with her that I don't always do that early on because it can not always go, there has to be a good amount of trust and everything there and a good rapport. Absolutely. But I did an exercise with her where we went back to her childhood. And she looked around for when she started, forming some of these beliefs. And we uncovered that when she was 9, well, we didn't uncover this. She knew that when she was 9, she was diagnosed with diabetes. Diabetes changed her whole life, right? Like everything kind of changed overnight. She was really sick too, which is how they diagnosed her, all the stuff. Not fun for anyone living with diabetes.
Right.
But what we uncovered was she told herself in that moment, I'm never going to be like the other people. Like, I'm never going to be like everyone else. I'm always going to be, I'm paraphrasing, but less than.
Right.
So then she grew up telling herself, she's less than, or she's average, or she's never going to do great things. So what happens when we have those beliefs as a child? Well, you're going to believe them as fact.
Yeah.
And you're going to think they're true. And then you're not going to go for the promotion, or you're not going to put yourself out there. But you don't always realize what is behind it, right? And I share a story in my book that we do not talk about as a family. I come from a small town of 8,000 people. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a teacher of elementary school. Everyone knows everybody. And when my brother was 12, he couldn't live with us anymore. He clashed so much with my parents, he kept running away, that it no longer became safe for him to live with us. And he had to go live with a foster family. And that's a story of a lot of, and I know Brene Brown's from Texas, like she talks about shame, right? Like it's a lot of shame on all of us. And I was 5, like I was young. I don't really remember. I had to get my family to fill me in on the details when I wrote the story in the chapter. Cause I was like, I don't know. My brother apparently even like was hopping a train to go from our small town to Montreal, which was like a 10-hour train ride or 8-hour train ride, like ridiculous at age 12. So all this stuff that I didn't remember.
Right.
But when my kid was 5, my oldest was 5, I was having struggles with him. And I wasn't really disciplining him in the sense of I was probably letting him get away with more than I should have. And I went and saw a therapist. And in one session, she linked it to, okay, if I discipline him, he could run away.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? I was like mind blowing that. And again, sometimes we can connect our own dots. Sometimes we can't. So do what works for you. But just in one session with her, I was able to be like, oh my gosh, that is why I'm acting this way. And then start to tell myself new stories.
Yeah. Right? Well, and it's so easy. The stories that we tell ourselves, they wear well-worn grooves in our brains, right? With this is the narrative that I know that it's easy to repeat. It's easy to go back to, and changing that narrative is so difficult. It's so important, especially when that story started when you were 5, right? It's like, it didn't even start, like it has been there the whole time. And with your client, that beautiful story, it's like, it started when she was young. Yeah. These are things that we don't have control over, the messages that we're being given all the time. But we do have control over what we do with them now.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
I love the shame piece. Of course, I don't love it, but I think it's very important.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. Some of her books are behind me right now. And of course, like, I think everyone doing this work has a soft spot for Brene and everything that she does. But I think shame is a huge piece of this, especially for women. I think it's really easy for us to roll into shame and guilt. And you talk about that in your book. And there's one thing that I wanted to make sure I asked about, and I have it marked, because it was about the shame of rejection. And I think that this is such a big piece, especially when we're talking about socialization and the messages we get from the world around us. And I'd never heard someone talk about this before, but it's always something that I've believed to be true about myself. And I never really knew why. And so this was just really powerful for me. And I would love to just have more of a conversation about it. But in talking about the shame and fear of rejection, you write, rejection stings more when I know the person. If it's someone I don't know or a famous person, I have no problem putting myself out there. And I don't know if that's true of everybody, but I have always felt that to be so true of myself, that if it is like, if I'm at a grocery store and I am there by myself and I don't know anyone, I can be silly, goofy, whoever I want to show up as. When I am at a dinner with my closest friends, that's when I am on guard the most. Why do you think that rejection stings the most, or we're more aware of that in those settings with the people we know? Because that's where love has been cultivated. It should be the
Yeah.
safest place.
Mhm.
I would just love to hear more.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I think it's just we take it more personally.
Hmm.
And I think what we do, here's what I think we do. Again, may not be the case for everybody, but I think we take a rejection from someone we know. It means they don't like me,
Hmm.
which may not be the case,
Right.
right? But we immediately go to, and I see it in my friend group, and I've been guilty of it too, right? You'll text somebody, be like, "Hey, you want to meet for a coffee on Thursday?" And then like, last night was really fun. I had so much fun with you, and then you don't hear back.
Yeah.
And what do? You immediately go to,
They
"Oh
hate
my
me.
gosh, they hate me. They didn't have fun. I'm saying I had fun. They don't feel the same way. They don't know what to say." Right? So we tell ourselves all these stories. And 9 times out of 10, it's, "Oh my gosh, I've been so busy, but yes, I had a great time."
Yeah.
Right? 9 times out of 10, people are just really, really busy, or they missed it. Like they saw your text, but then they forgot to respond, or whatever it is. But I think we just have such a desire to be liked
Yeah.
that it's hard. And so the way I've started, I've worked on dealing with that. Well, I have a couple of ways. So one is a few years ago, I have it on a sticky note, and it's CLWOT, which just sounds kind of funny. It's like kilowatt, and it's care less what others think. And and it's funny because I wrote it as an acronym because I didn't want anyone to see it, which is like ironic.
Right.
And I share this now when I go do talks to organizations, especially if it's groups of women. I share this because I was like, care less what others think. At the end of the day, and I know you talk a lot about energy on your show, at the end of the day, if you are trying to be someone different to fit in, you're just using a lot of energy. And I think the beautiful thing is, once you can be more of yourself, once you can care less and be more silly or be more authentic or share what you're really feeling, you're going to find your true friends and your true
Yeah.
group. And it may be different, right? It may not be the people you're hanging around with right now, which sucks. And it's hard to move on from groups. But sometimes we do. Sometimes we outgrow people.
Yeah.
Especially, if anyone's into personal development, I find too, the more you do, the more you realize who's not into it. And sometimes it's harder to be around those people. I know I find that personally. So it's finding your right people. It's being yourself. It's just caring less what others think.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, yes, it still might sting that if a friend makes a comment or doesn't like the person you're becoming or whatever, but you'll find your people.
Yeah. How do you think, what are ways that we can practice kilowatt? What are ways that we can start integrating this maybe into like a daily routine? Or is it just that daily reminder, or like writing it on a sticky note and
Yeah.
sticking it on your forehead or something, or on your mirror?
Right. That's a
yeah,
great,
what are,
yes, do that. Like that. I recommend that. You make up a story of what it's there for. I don't know. Have fun with
yeah.
it, or make up a new acronym. What works for you?
Yeah.
Another thing, I don't know if you ever saw the show Schitt's Creek.
Oh my goodness, I love
Okay.
Schitt's Creek.
So it's a Canadian show. It's
Yes.
like filmed just outside Toronto. But I love, the other thing I tell people is think of Moira Rose. So anyone who doesn't know Schitt's Creek, the story is it's a really wealthy family loses everything, basically overnight, everything. And they have to move in to a really rundown hotel in a really, really like small village, which is not, it's a complete opposite of the life they were used to living. And Moira Rose was like a B actress with all these elaborate, wigs and outfits and stuff like that. And rather than switch for like overalls and plaid shirts and whatever else she would wear to fit in with that community, she stays who she is. She wears the elaborate outfits and wigs and talks with her accent sometimes. And she is who she is. And I picture her a lot to remind myself, okay, it's funny. I say be like Moira Rose, but I don't really mean that because that would be being
Right.
somebody else. But think about how she is. Be
Right.
authentic like Moira Rose. Like be you.
Yes.
Be you as best you can. And remember that. And then another exercise I do with my clients that I find can be really fun and also cathartic is if there are people that you still think about that or old friends that maybe you've grown apart with or a bad relationship or a teacher that annoyed you or something, write write it down on a piece of paper. You can put like on a sticky note, one per person or whatever, and then do some type of let and go ritual.
Mm,
Whether it's having a bonfire and safely and putting the pieces of paper in a fire, or I've had one of my clients went and threw rocks into a lake. So for
mm,
everything she wanted to let go of, she threw a rock into the lake. You can just rip up the pieces of paper, whatever works for you. But sometimes if we do that letting go, you do a ritual that I'm going to let go of the people that don't love me for me. I'm going to
yeah.
let go of them and not let them still impact me. It can be a really nice way to also move on and start caring less what others think.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think so often we do, at least maybe I'm projecting, but I get when doing this work stuck inside of my own head. And it's like you're trying to do this work all mentally. And so having something that you can physically do to represent it is really great for getting that feeling into your body. And I love this like image of this like strong throwing of the rock and like having that like physicality to represent the work that you're trying to do is really beautiful and
Mhm.
powerful. And I think having something as like a physical marker does help us internalize that a little bit more. Sometimes I'll say it's easy to like take the pill, but we still have to wait for it to dissolve, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, you pop an ibuprofen and your headache still is there for a little bit.
Yeah.
We can have all of these beliefs, but until that pill is dissolved, it's like we're still practicing.
Yeah.
So I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
one, I like that. I like the ibuprofen metaphor. That's a good one. And I'll say too, one of the things that held me back, so maybe there's somebody, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, partner, whatever it is, maybe even your parents, right? Our parents still have a big hold over us no matter how old we
Totally.
get. For me, I was, when I knew I wanted to pursue Shannon 2.0, although I'm kind of on Shannon 3.0, I would say now. But when I was looking at potentially leaving corporate, starting my own job, being more authentic, showing up more authentic, being more vulnerable. My husband is the complete opposite of me. Like I share everything now. I didn't when I was in corporate because I was so afraid of how I
Right.
would be judged. But now my whole goal is no, I want to share the messy. I want to share the vulnerable. I want to share the
Yeah.
struggles because there was no one really around doing that for me when I was young and trying to figure stuff out. So
Yeah.
I want to be able to be that person to help share and just really let people know they're not alone. But I will say, I was really nervous to start to make some of the changes because I told myself, I'm about to change and not be the person my husband married. And what if we get divorced over it?
Mm,
And that really, I think, held me back too, because I was
wow.
so worried that, oh my gosh, I'm, he didn't marry authentic, although he did, I was pretty authentic with him from the beginning. But it was like I had this fear that, ooh, authentic Shannon is going to be worse versus better, right? So I think
Yeah.
sometimes we think that too. Well, people aren't going to like us if we show up as ourselves. But at the end, it was so much better. Like our relationship's better. We just, again, I'm not wasting the energy of trying to be somebody else. I'm happier. And I think when you're happier, everyone around you benefits.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's really real in the sense that it's like if I start showing up authentically, who am I going to lose? Is it going to cause problems with my family, with my friends, with my partner, my spouse, my kids, anything, right? My job. What are the ripple effects of that? And I think that what you touched on earlier is, at least for me, has really rung true in doing this work, that you will lose people. Absolutely, you will. And that is part of the journey and part of the growing. But it's almost like a magnet, right? Where it's like when you're magnetized for your true north, you're better able to attract the people that are meant for you, right? And so
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, some people will be pushed away by that new magnet, right? Like other magnets
Mhm.
are, but that's making space for people who can better resonate. But it's
Yeah, love that. Mhm.
certainly hard in that journey.
Yes.
There's another piece in this book that I really wanted to talk about. Oh, yes. When your kids seem so wise beyond their years, um, your oldest being in the hospital, and as he was going into surgery, you say that he
Mhm.
turns to you and says, "Mommy, remember, be brave and always be yourself." And then earlier you shared the story of, "Can I give you a goal? Be less angry." As a mom, how has just the role, the title, the feeling of motherhood changed your relationship to self-growth, but
Mhm.
also seeing yourself through your kiddos' eyes and hearing these really powerful messages? I'm like, kids are much more wise than I think anyone gives them credit for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just talk to me about that and what that has been like for your
Yeah.
journey.
I think one of the and I find too, like one of a moment for me was when I worked with my first coach. And it's a silly example. Well, not silly example. It's a simple example. And it was she was like, what are some of the things you want to get done this week or whatever?" And I said, "Well, I want to go I said, "I'm going to try and go to yoga."
Mm,
And she was like, "Try. Yeah, no. Are you going or you're not going? Like, there is no try. It's you're going or you're not going." I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to yoga." And she's like, "Well, what's your hesitation?" And this was pre-COVID. And I was like, "Well, I'll go on my way home from work, but then that means I get home a bit later. And then I only have an hour with my kids before bed." So again, the guilt factor. And she said, "Okay, but who are you when you get home? And which version is better for your kids?" And that was so powerful for me to hear. And that is something that I now carry around. And oh my gosh, I have my faults. My kids have too much screen time at time. We definitely are not perfect parents. I don't think anyone's a
sure.
perfect
No
parent.
one is, right?
But it's really given me the drive to be like, okay, who do I want my kids to be? What
Mm,
behaviors do I want to role model? And I think that's something where my husband and I are really aligned on is at the end of the day, we want to create kind, good kids, right? I don't care if you make, how much money you make or what role you do. I want you to be happy. I want you to be kind. I want you to be healthy. And that's what matters at the
yeah.
end of the day. And so just being able to role model those behaviors. It's funny, when I started my business, I started as a health coach. But then I, moved into more this performance and coaching and lifestyle kind of coaching
Hmm.
and things. But my now almost 11-year-old will still be like, "I don't understand. Why did you leave health coaching? Like, it's so important. People need health coaches. I don't get it. I think you should go back to that." And he's so funny. But yeah, just really role modeling for them and hoping for the best, right? Is all we can really
Yeah,
do.
truly. Well, and isn't it so interesting that such a big part, I at least I feel this with my friends. I am not a parent, so it certainly don't have that experience, but um I do think that there's this interesting thing that, like, because you care about your kids so much and like they are the most important thing to a parent, right? That it almost puts even more responsibility to be the best version of yourself, because that's what I want for my kids, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful. Like, sure, you could be home for 2 hours and tired and maybe grumpy from work, or you can be home for one and really be the person for your kids that you want to be that night,
Yeah. And that's a
because
big
you're taking
message
care
I
of
want
yourself.
them to know too. If I go out to meet a friend, or my youngest really loves me putting him to bed and he wants me to put him to bed every single night.
Hmm.
I'm like, some nights I'm going to go out and meet a friend, and then he's,
Right.
or we'll do date night. And we get a sitter in, and it's always the guilt, right? Because I'll be like, no, mom, what do you mean you can't put me to bed tonight? But I'll tell him, like, you like to spend time with your friends, and it's important. It is also
Yeah.
important for adults to spend time with their friends, or important for date nights, or whatever that is. Like, I just want him to know these things now. So he doesn't become like some of us who, as we grow up, we're like, oh, our life needs to revolve 100% around our kids. No. Yes,
Yeah.
kids are important. They're our top priority, but we need to be doing stuff that brings us happiness and joy and energy as well, so we can be
Yes.
better versions for them.
Totally. And it does make you better able to parent them, right? At least I
Yeah,
would imagine. Again, I
totally.
am not a parent,
Yeah,
but
no, you got it. You got it.
um that is so interesting. There's one, I've been in therapy for a very long time. My mom has her LPC, and so I was raised in a very mental health aware household. But my therapist is actually a couples counselor. That's her normal thing. But I've just been with her for so long, so she can't
Love
get rid
that.
of me now.
Yeah.
But of course, I pick up bits and pieces from her couples counseling work. And one thing that she's certified in PACT, which is a special like form, and they have this concept called the bubble, and it's about how the relationship bubble should be your priority. And there's a bunch of
Mhm.
research around how that actually does make you a better parent to your kids, because you're modeling taking care of yourself. So I love
Interesting.
that. And I think that that was something that, as a kid who felt like unconditionally loved and like I was the most important thing in my parents' life, that it was like, huh, a lot of that actually comes from like your ability to take care of yourself, comes from seeing how your parents take care of themselves
Yeah, so
first.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There's even more good stuff in here, so I want to make sure we dive into it. Um, Kind of towards the middle end, you have an exercise in here called Uncovering the Real You. And I think that it's really so beautiful because so many of us waltz around with a mask, right? And I think sometimes we wear that mask even for ourselves because it's easier sometimes. How do you define real you-ness? I mean, if you want to talk about Shannon specifically, that's great, but also just in general, like, what does a real you mean?
Yeah. And I think it's a tricky one, right? Because our brains play tricks on us and stuff too. So sometimes you're like, is that the real me? Do I really like
Yeah.
this? And it's, I know I'm a lot older than you, but the movie Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts is such a classic example. And she's, she's keeps getting engaged, but never can finish walking down the aisle to get married. And it shows that she never knew what kind of eggs she liked. So every person she was engaged to, she just assumed their type of eggs. And so one of the things was like, what type of eggs do I actually like? Because she never knew. So it's kind of like that, right? So it's, you know, what do you actually like? Like, when have you noticed you just go along with other people because you don't want to create upset, or maybe you don't care that
Yeah.
much, that's okay too, but when do you just go along versus when is it you, being you? And I think one of the ways to do it is think back to, when were you the happiest in your life? And unfortunately for a lot of people, it probably is childhood, right before we had responsibilities and stress and all this stuff. But it's thinking, and again, not everyone's childhood is going to be full of happiness, but thinking of, when is one moment in your life where you were really happy, and looking at what was going on then. What was the environment? Who was around you? What were you doing? Like, it usually is linked to our self-confidence too. When we felt our most confident,
Mm.
as well. So what were those, parameters that were happening to make you feel that way? For some of you, it may be like yesterday, which is awesome. Some of you may be living really authentic lives, and that is amazing. And you say what you mean all the time, and that's great. And it's almost like because other people are worried, like, I don't want to be a jerk. And I'm like, no, don't be a jerk. Like, you don't have to go to the point where you have no filter, right? And you're
Right.
saying everything as it comes up. No, that's not what being your authentic self is. But it's not changing who you are for either the situation or the other person, right? So if you're changing who you are, that's tiring.
Yeah.
So who are you when you're most happy, you're most confident, and how can you bring more of that into your life?
Yeah. I love that. And I do think that to tie this back a little bit into, my work, it's like, when are you the most happy, the most confident? For me, it's when I'm aligned with my purpose, right? And it's like, that is what so many of us, I think, could do with a little bit more of. And at the beginning of our conversation, you noted that your purpose, your real passion is this work, is helping other people find their most authentic selves, uncover, break free, and live more aligned, confident, purpose-filled lives. What do you think it is that, because not everyone has this, I believe everyone has a spark inside of them that is their purpose, but I don't think that purpose is always help other people find their purpose. And
Mm,
as two people
yes.
who have that kind of energy towards that, how does that help you live a meaningful life? How does helping other people find meaning make your purpose light up?
I think at the end of the day, that is what brings people the most satisfaction, I want to say. Like, ideally happiness too, but I think when people are able to do something that's aligned to their why, their purpose, or just something that feels meaningful to them, that is when you can feel most at ease or just happy, whatever words you want to use. But I think so often it sounds daunting or it sounds scary and we don't know what it is. So it's like, oh, I have no idea what that is for me. So, oh my gosh, I don't even want to try and go there. Or I'm going to look
Right.
silly telling somebody I don't know what it is. Right. And most of us don't. And I didn't either for years. I share a story of all I knew was I wanted to get out of banking. And
Mm.
people would say, what do you want to do next? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. And I felt silly for saying that. But in reality, like maybe a couple people judged me, being like, well, you better go figure that out. But for the most part, people were lovely. And they're like, okay, well, tell me a bit more. What types of things do you like to do? Right. So it's almost like, what are those bullets of activities, whether personally, professionally, you like to do? And we do that. Or what do you not like to do? Sometimes that's easier. And just every conversation helped me get a little clearer and a little clearer and a little clearer, right? And that's what I want to help people do is I want them,
Mm.
I want to help them just get a little clearer on where they want to go with this life, right? We have one beautiful life to live. And I don't want to, we don't want to wake up tomorrow, find out it's our last day. And I do get morbid a lot of times too, because like sometimes
Hey.
we have to get morbid to realize like if tomorrow was your last day, would you be happy with the life you've lived?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is deeply important. My undergrad studied a lot of philosophy, and that really informs a lot of my stuff. And a really big thing is the only thing we're guaranteed, the only thing we're promised is death. That is
Mhm.
the only thing that life guarantees. And with that, what are you doing with this? And I think it's important to have that reminder because it is easy to live asleep,
Mhm.
not thinking about that. But as soon as you have that reminder, I mean, there's a reason why so many people, when they lose their parents or loved ones, like completely
Mhm.
change their life, it's because that is that reminder of this time is finite
Yep.
and special and important. So, I think a little healthy dose of morbidity is a good thing, which sounds
Yes,
silly,
I
but
agree. Yeah, it is.
um, I also really want to ask you, how did writing this lovely book, Breaking Free, help you break
Mhm.
free personally? I think so often, at least for myself, I mean, the old saying, you really don't know how to do something until you can teach it to someone else. Um, and in trying to spread self love and spread self growth and making meaning and living a meaningful life, more than anything, has helped me do that work.
Mhm.
Um, so, what's that journey been like for you? And in being a coach and being someone who is trying to help other people live authentically and chase their happiness, how has that helped you do the same?
I think it's just, you know what, sometimes it connected a lot of those dots for me that I didn't realize needed connecting. I uncovered new things. One thing I talk about in the book is a fear of success. And it was like, I never would have ever realized I had a fear of success before, but I did. I had this major fear of success. Like, oh, if I'm successful, then what? Like, oh, I'll be on this next platform, and that's scary. And so uncovering a lot of things about myself that again allowed me to break free even more were really awesome. And I think another, like on a more personal side, asking my family for permission to share the story about my brother was a
Mm,
really big one for our family because we don't talk about it. And in fact, one of my best friends texted me last week and said, I just read the story about your brother. She goes, I don't think I ever knew it, like knew the full
yeah,
thing. And I was like, oh, really? And she goes, no. And she's one of my best friends. And meanwhile, we weren't friends when that happened. Like we became friends
sure.
later on. But still, it was just that part of being able to talk to my family. We all talked about it. We brought it up. I think it was really important for us to do. And then yeah, I think it was just also the part, another thing we haven't talked much about, but I also interviewed some women as well to include in the book because I didn't want it to just be my story because sure,
Hmm.
some people are going to relate to my stories, but some may not. And so I wanted to include other stories of other, I call us everyday women that, aren't the celebrities. So they're more relatable. So including their stories as well was really fun to do and just inspiring to hear,
Yeah,
inspiring and also like you understand we all go through the same thing. We may not feel like we all go through the same things, but we do. And I'd say that's the biggest compliment I've gotten since releasing the book is I'm having people write me and going, "Oh my gosh, it's like you're in my head and you're writing exactly what I've struggled with." And I'm like, "Oh, I love hearing that because that is what I
yeah,
wanted to do."
yeah, absolutely. And I do think a really big part of, um, in recognizing the stories that we tell ourselves and tell about ourselves is in owning them and owning our truth. And, how you said, like, your family didn't talk about that story with your brother. And what does that communicate to a young child? And now the empowerment of being able to say, no, it is a part of my story and it's a part of who I am and what has made me me is a really powerful testament to being able to own all sides of who you are, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of the things. And I also just totally relate to the power of course, interviewing people. That's, big part of what I do is interviewing not just the celebrities, but everyday people. And we all have a story. We all have at least one great story to tell. And I think that that is really so powerful that your book helps tell that story, not just of you, but of resilience and breaking free across different people.
Thank
Um, the last two questions that
you.
I always
Mhm.
like to finish up conversations with. One is just in light of our conversation, in light of all of these things that we've talked about, chatted about, um, is there anything that you would like to clarify, return to, add to, or is there something that we haven't touched on at all that you're like, we need to talk about this before before we close out? So this is space for if there's anything you would like to discuss, bring up additionally.
You know what? I'll just share one more thing. You did a great job, Reese. So yes, I feel like you covered everything really well. But one analogy, because I love you, you've used a couple, and I think sometimes those are helpful. One analogy I use, and I would encourage any of you who are going to read this book or just any other personal development book or podcast, as you're thinking about transformation, liken it to any type of renovation. So whether you've lived through a renovation or just seen one on TV, it doesn't matter, but it starts with a vision. So it starts with that beautiful, okay, where do I want to be in 5 or 10 years or 1 year? What does that look like? And then the next step in any renovation is the mess, the demolition, the breaking down, the hard times, the work, the things going off track or off schedule or off budget. But we don't abandon a renovation, right? We keep going, and we know that it's going to be worth it and better. And transformation is the same. And if you can get through to the other side, the vision may not be the exact same as how it started, but it's more than likely going to be better than where you are today. So just keeping that in mind to do the work and go through the mess to make it out the other side.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's such a great mental image because, of course, no one would leave their house in shambles, right? Because it's like, how am I supposed to live here? But it can feel when it's like your internal world, like, this is not what I thought it would be. This is not what I wanted it to be. I need to turn around and go back, you know? But I do think once you start uncovering that stuff, there is nothing but to plow ahead and keep going. But you're so right. It is messy, but that is, part of, you mentioned chains. Part of breaking free is breaking, right? You've got to tear some stuff down to be able to build up a stronger, more beautiful you. I think that's wonderful. Last question. What is one word to describe what you are feeling right now, your current state?
I'd say peaceful.
I love that. Tell us why.
I think this is just a lovely conversation. It was lovely chatting with you, Reese. I love everything you're doing. I love talking about meaning. And I think one thing, if anything, our lives are full of such highs and lows that now I almost strive for more like more the middle. Like I want a flatter road. And I want to feel at peace more versus, the roller coaster. So I think you brought a lot of peace to me today. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And thank you for your beautiful time and wisdom and expertise during this episode. For all of our listeners, you will be able to find Shannon in the show notes or in the episode description, wherever you are listening, watching. The book will be linked down there. Website and socials will be linked down there as well. So definitely check out Breaking Free and check out Shannon's work. It is certainly worth it. And just thank you so much again, Shannon. Is there anything else that you would like to plug or send people to?
No, thank you for having me, Reese. Yeah, just feel free. You can find out all my information, everything on shannontalbot.com. Link to the book there as well. But yes, would love to for you to check it out and reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. Feel free to reach out to me.
Absolutely. Shannon, thank you so much again. I so appreciate it. And have a fabulous rest of your Wednesday. And I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for being here today. And a huge thank you to Shannon for her time and energy during this beautiful episode and conversation that we had. I truly had such an enjoyable time talking with Shannon. And I think a lot of the time I get in my own head about the making meaning journey. And so just being able to talk with someone about their journey and how it's changed their life is just affirming to know that we're not alone along this work, in this work. Of course, please check out Shannon's book, Breaking Free. There will be links and everything in the show notes and the episode notes wherever you are accessing this episode. You can find Shannon on Instagram at Shannon Talbot Coaching, or you can head to her website, www.shannontalbot.com. All of the links, of course, again, will be down below. If you would like to, you can follow me on Instagram at Lillian Reese Brown. And again, you can follow Cohere anywhere where there is social media, all at the Cohere Collective. A big thank you to Tristan Morgan for making Meaning's theme music. You can find him on Instagram at Tristan Morgan. And a huge thank you to Nicole Oesterreicher for making Meaning's art and podcast cover. You can find Nicole on Instagram at Nicole O Creates and Nicole O Design. Right now, I am feeling... You know what? This is no, it's not silly. I was about to say it's a little silly, but it's not. Today is a Libra full moon lunar eclipse when I'm recording this, and tomorrow when this episode comes out will be the day after the Libra full moon eclipse. And I really love tying up a lot of my spiritual practices in alignment with the patterns of the moon in our solar system. I feel like we are innately, beings of the universe. That's where our atoms come from. Our atoms move in the same structure that the solar system does, that the planets do, and that's the same pattern that we see in sacred geometry and how honeycombs form and plants grow and all of those beautiful things, right? So we move and live in the rhythm of these things. And so my spiritual practice is always really aligned with that rhythm of the universe as well. And so last night I was doing a little spiritual meditation on the Libra full moon lunar eclipse and what that meant for me and entering this next stage. And it's really been a time of new beginnings. This last week, this last month, this year, I feel like new beginnings has just been a huge theme for me. If you listen to the last solo episode, you will know what I'm talking about. And every time I do a practice like this, I like to find a word that will be kind of my intention for the next month, what I want to focus on, who I want to show up as. And the word that I settled on was limitless. So that's going to be my word today. Today I am feeling limitless, just because I think this lifetime is too short to be the one that puts limits on ourselves. And so many other things like time and energy already are limiting factors that I think about in my own mind of things that are getting in the way of me doing what I want. But I'm really wanting to step into the idea that I already have everything that I want, and that is because I am limitless. The things that are coming to me are already mine, and there is no need to put a limit on myself or on other people. Let everyone live their own life in their time, and I want to do the same for me and the same for you. So I hope you are feeling limitless today. That is all I have, I believe. Happy Libra full moon lunar eclipse. It's also called the penumbral eclipse, I think. Spring equinox just happened. Happy spring equinox. And if you celebrate Easter, happy Easter. If you celebrate Ramadan, happy Ramadan. If you celebrate Holi, happy Holi. All of these beautiful spring holidays are coming up. And I'll encourage you to look into the cultural, historic, and etymological history of whatever holiday you celebrate. I think we'll all be surprised to find the ways that these are all deeply related to one another and inform one another. And that has always deepened my own spiritual practice when I look at how interconnected the things I do are with the things that other people do. So that's all I have. And I hope you feel like you are living more coherently. I will see you next time. Love.